Hi, guys. Before I get started, I want to apologize about last week. I was not able to give a mini lecture because I had an issue with my health that had to be addressed and I needed time to address it. Unfortunately, this is one of the issues with having a chronic illness, but this is also one of the reasons why I really like having online lectures, just in case something happens. And so I have these online lectures with which are the bulk of the class. You'll notice they're the 3 hours and 25 minutes or whatever they're supposed to be, or close to that. Usually they're about 3 hours. And then I'm giving the mini lectures as a way to connect with you all and to have you connect with each other for the students who opt to participate in the mini lectures. But for those of you who were interested in participating in the mini lecture last week, I just want to apologize and say that I hope that that doesn't happen again moving forward. I mentioned this on this week's announcements, but this week we will have office hours from 6 to 8 because we have an assignment due tomorrow night. I will be online answering any last minute questions that you may or may not have. Feel free, however, to hop on to say hi. I know that we haven't seen each other, those of you who attend the mini lectures, or those of you who just, haven't really attended the mini lectures. If you want to chat, we can chat about anything, right? So we can talk about classes, our class specifically, any other classes, any questions you might have about consumer behavior, any questions you might have about the MBA program or Wayne State. Although, to be fair, the last two, the MBA program in Wayne State, I might not be able to answer, but I will absolutely look into it if you ask me a question, or if you have anything else you want to talk about. I will remind you that I am a huge fan of Star Trek: The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. So if you if you want to jump on and talk about those things, I would love it. Like, seriously love it. I also, this is random, but I have a friend who I'm going to go visit in November. And last night, right before I went to sleep, she sends me this text, and it is, oh my God, it is a preview of 90 Day Fiance. Now, know that I don't watch shows like this because I don't really watch a lot of current television. But I watched this preview. I could not stop thinking about this show. The last time I visited her, she made me watch 3 episodes of 90 Day Fiance. I've never seen anything crazier in my life, and this preview has made it seem like the show has just hit a level of crazy I've never heard of. But I did ask her, "Why are you sending me this?" And she's like, "Because when you visit me, this is what we'll be doing." So if you want to give me some background on 90 Day Fiance, feel free to do that as well. Okay, so this week we'll be talking about the consumer decision making process quite a bit. We're still talking about that. And interspersed in that conversation, we'll be talking about consumer satisfaction. I like to point out a couple of quotes um, that I put on the first page. There is only one boss, the customer, and he can fire everybody in the company from the chairman on down simply by spending his money somewhere else. Now, to be fair, I am a little biased. This is a Sam Walton quote. I am a little biased towards Mr. Sam Walton. I went to get my PhD at the University of Arkansas in the Sam Walton School of Business. And if you walk into the Sam Walton School of Business, you see these huge displays, these placards of different quotes that Sam Walton has said about business. It's actually quite a nice display. I highly recommend it if you're in Fayetteville, Arkansas. The second is Howard Schultz, who says our mission statement about treating people with respect and dignity is not just words, but a creed we live by every day. You can't expect your employees to exceed the expectations of your customers if you don't exceed the employees' expectations of management. Now, this I think is extremely important. And one of the things we don't talk about enough is, and unfortunately we don't have a huge amount of time in this class to talk about, is how consumer behavior and specifically marketing as a whole, let's talk about marketing as a whole, works when it comes to employees. The fact of the matter is that if you're a business, you should be participating in internal and external marketing. And internal marketing is marketing to your employees. I worked for Philip Morris, the manufacturers of Marlboro cigarettes, and one of the things I will tell you up front is that they did a good job of marketing to us. So Marlboro doesn't really show commercials anymore to the public. They still create them though, and they show them to employees. So every time we had a meeting, and we had frequent meetings, every time we had a big meeting, they would show us these Marlboro commercials, and they would be electric. I mean, you would just, you would sit there and be like, wow, right? I'm working for a company that's really out here, like doing things. It'd be like the Marlboro Man, and I mean, it'd just be amazing. I mean, you would just feel like, I mean, they were like 3 to 5 minute commercials, and afterwards you just feel so good because the commercials were so good. Um, and we had a lot of meetings, like once a month, once every other month. We would, meet at these locations for 3 to 4 days. They'd be extremely nice locations. We'd have amazing food. We'd have really great entertainment. I remember Marlboro had their 50th year anniversary, and we actually had a huge party at a mansion. Every party, we often had parties at, or meetings at resorts, and we'd get massages, and every party would be unlimited booze. I'm not much of a drinker myself unless I am prompted to drink by everyone around me, and then unfortunately for me, I can drink like a fish. But I don't actually like liquor, so I don't really drink that often on my own or like when I go out. But at these parties, everybody was drinking. But it was just a really good time. And I think that that really good time kind of was good because it made us more excited about Marlboro, and it made us more, and our jobs in general, and the company, and it made us more excited, and it made us excited to think about those times when we had maybe a bad day at work, right? So that was kind of interesting. And something that companies can and should do. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the lecture because I'm kind of rambling at this point. Okay. So step 4 in the consumer decision making process is the purchase step, right? Where you actually go and purchase your product. So we'll spend a few minutes talking about this step. So we usually say that consumers engage in 4 types of buying decision behavior. For decisions that require high involvement, but there are significant differences between brands, we say that the consumer engages in complex buying behavior. For high involvement decisions where there are few differences between brands, we say that they engage in dissonance reducing buying behavior. Remember, high involvement products or purchase decisions tend to be expensive, risky, infrequent, and self-expressive, meaning they allow you to express yourself. For low involvement, where there are significant differences between brands, we say that the consumer engages in variety-seeking behavior. And when there is low involvement but few differences between brands, we say that the consumer engages in habitual buying behavior. As a reminder, low involvement products and purchases and consumption situations usually carry low cost, low risk, and tend to happen fairly frequently. So if we were to actually kind of take that graph out and talk about it specifically, complex buying behavior, remember high involvement and perceived significant differences between brands. Usually an example of that would be a car, right? So the product is expensive, it's risky, again, you purchase it infrequently, and it's highly self-expressive. When you have this, few differences between brands, however, with high involvement products, you are going to see more something like carpeting, right? So a car versus carpeting. If we were doing habitual buying behavior, where there is a few significant differences between brands, right? Or few significant differences between brands, not a few, but few. An example of that might be salt. And then variety seeking behavior, where you actually see or you perceive that there are more differences between brands. An example of that might be cookies. So So before I start talking about this slide, I just want to point out the brain that's shopping on the right hand side of the slide, which I think is adorable. And it also kind of speaks to this idea that you shop partially at least with your brain. I guess if the picture were completely accurate, you'd also see a heart in there somewhere. So now we're at the acquisition phase of the consumer buying decision process. And we've talked about choosing a product, right, or service or other market offering. We could be talking about something like the TV that you're deciding to watch, these kind of things. Um, but you're still needing to evaluate different things about purchasing the product before you purchase it, particularly if it's an involved or a highly involved purchase. You need to choose the specific retailer that you're going through. There are in-store choices that you might make. The color of your laptop if you're buying a laptop, or the color of your book bag if you're buying a book bag. Do you want an in-store warranty? The capacity of the laptop or the book bag that you're purchasing. If we were talking about watching a television show, it would be, do you want to watch it online or do you want to watch it in real time? These kind of things. Um, One thing to remember is that by the time you get here, purchase intention can change. It can be influenced by things like in-store promotions, discounts, salespeople, failure to find the product. Maybe you no longer have the financial resources. I'm sure we all have a story of how we were dead set on buying one product. We walked into a store, we bought another. And maybe we were influenced by things such as price or the salesperson person at the store, excuse me. Um, it could have been financial resources, so on and so forth. So just knowing that or believing that you're going to buy something or consume something is not enough, because there are so many factors that still come into play. So what normally really happens is that you evaluate your alternatives and you find an alternative that you want and you have this purchase intention, right? So we in the 5 steps, we often say purchase, but really it becomes purchase intention. And there are a few things that can get in the way of purchase intention and purchase decisions. And two of the things that can get in the way of purchase intention and purchase decision are attitudes of others and unanticipated situational factors, which I'm going to talk about in the next 2 slides. So, in addition to things that happen when you're in the store, whether it's they don't have the product, so they have stockouts, whether it's you decide you want something else, whether it's discount, so on and so forth, there are other things that affect the decision making process as well, right? And I want to make sure that we address those or at least acknowledge those before we move forward. I talked about this idea of having psychological variables, maybe motivation, perception, trust, maybe your lifestyle. Maybe you have social influences, maybe family, maybe social class. I always think that social class is tricky in the sense that we had these definitive social classes, I would say 30, 40 years ago. And when you were in one class, you rarely bought products or made decisions that people in other classes made. But that's not true anymore, right? So I think this is one of the ways society has advanced. It used to be that if you were lower class, you never traveled. And now we know that people who are lower class go on vacations. It used to be if you were middle class, you never, you know, really sent your kid to private school, but people do those kind of things now. I say all this because our next few classes will deal with things like culture and social class and the self. And so, anyway, you just want to remember those things when you're thinking about purchasing. So, other people's attitudes do have an impact, especially if their attitude is intensely negative or vice versa. And especially if you're close to that person. If that's true, you will absolutely, usually, I shouldn't say absolutely, I'll say usually, more times than not, adjust your purchase intention, right? So, I'll give you an example for me. When I was getting my PhD, I went and toured Fayetteville, Arkansas before I moved there. Yeah, so I went on an interview. It was like a 5-day interview. for the PhD program. And I noticed that a lot of people there have scooters. So Fayetteville is smallish, and it's very hilly, but people buy these really cute little scooters and they drive around on these scooters that, get great gas and seem fun. So I decided to buy myself a scooter, right? I'm like, oh, they are so cute. I really want one. And I told a few people that I know, and everyone's reaction was negative. So then I talked to my aunt, who's like my mom, and I was like, listen, I'm going to buy myself one of these scooters. And she was like, no, this is really a bad decision. You aren't the most coordinated. You're kind of clumsy. You often have a lot of random things that happen to you. I just can't see it. So then I explained that, I would go to training and all these things. And she was like, I just don't think so. I don't think that you should buy it. I'm just thinking about you in general, and the fact that you have, no depth perception. I'm not even sure you should be driving a car. Anyway, I went ahead and backed off and just bought a Toyota Camry instead. So, you know, I wanted to comply with my aunt's wishes. That is absolutely true. But also I value her opinion, and she's pretty spot on with some of my issues. So, I backed off the scooter purchase. So there's also an issue of unanticipated situational factors, right? We talked about this, I think, in the last lecture, but unanticipated situational factors really do occur. You could have something wrong with your money, right? One of my one of my absolute favorite stories is that I was with one of my cousins, and she had a young son. I think it was like 4 or 5, and we went to Nebraska Furniture Mart, which is this huge furniture store that Warren Buffett owns. It's like 8 of them in the country. It's amazing. Anyway, we go to the tech area, and my cousin's son says he really wants this DVD. And my cousin says, well, did you bring your piggy bank? And he's like, no. She was like, that's why you always have to keep your piggy bank with you. Like, right? So for him, he wasn't anticipating wanting a DVD. He didn't have his piggy bank with him. Other people might have, adults might have more adult problems, right? So maybe an unexpected emergency pops up, or maybe you realize that you don't have as much money as you thought. That is a problem. Maybe coronavirus kind of gets in the way of you doing things. Like maybe you were going to join a gym and then the gym's closed, or maybe you were going to get your hair done and then the city shut down. Um, so these things can happen. As I said in the last lecture, there are risks that do get in the way, and I think I talk about those risks in the next slide. Boom, I was right. So perceived risk. Remember that the risk will vary with the cost of the offering, right? So if it's really expensive, you might perceive more risk. When you're uncertain about the attributes or characteristics of the product or service under consideration or other offering. So, there could be some social risk involved. Maybe it might embarrass you. Um, you know, Maybe you wonder if the price is worth it, so on and so forth. And then last but not least, I should mention that perceived risk also vary with your self-confidence, right? So if you're a person who's really self-confident, then maybe the product paid is worth the price and you just believe that it is. Maybe you don't believe that you'll get any kind of physical risk. All of these things could be true. You could be a person who's playing the stock market right now, right? So you could be on Reddit's subreddit called Wall Street Bets, where you're just kind of playing the market quite a bit. And if you're self-confident, I think those kind of things work out and you perceive the risk to be lower. So there you go. So we've talked about innovations. We should also talk about a few other things. So a company can create a new innovative
product or service or market offering, but consumers have to get it, right? Consumers have to be receptive to that product. They have to adopt it or not. So we'll talk about adoption and diffusion next. Adoption, the micro process concerned with the stages the consumer goes through in deciding to accept or reject a new product. I put these kind of little figures on here to think about this idea that people are different, right? People are different. And so when they're making the decision to accept or reject a new product, um, it's complicated, and it depends on who the consumer is, the company that is creating the product, and the product itself. And then diffusion, a macro process concerned with the spread of a new product from its source to the consuming public. So we'll talk about both of those and what they mean. So there are different adopter groups, which I'm sure you've seen in other classes. The first are what they call innovators, a very small percentage of the population, people who are risk takers and also have the resources and desire to try new things, even if those things fail. The next group is what they call early adopters, about 13.5% of the population, who are selective about which technologies they start using. They are considered the ones that people check in with for new information and to reduce the uncertainty about new technology before adopting it, right? So other people look at early adopters to see whether or not they're going to actually adopt new technology. The early majority, about 34% of consumers, take their time before adopting a new idea. They are willing to embrace a new technology as long as they understand how it fits with their lives. Um, Another 34% of the population are what they call the late majority. They adopt new innovations in reaction to peer pressure, emerging norms, or economic necessity. Um, the thing about people in the late majority, though, is that the uncertainty around the product itself should be resolved before they're willing to adopt the product. And then, last but not least, what they call the laggards, people who make decisions based on past experience. They are usually economically unable to take risk on new ideas, right? So people who are laggards usually can't really afford um, to take risks. They don't have the resources to do so. So if you think of something like the VCR, once laggards figured out, hey, this actually works and it's great, they had to wait until the price came down to actually afford it. And this makes sense. Usually when new technology comes out, it becomes very expensive and decreases in price over time. So even people like the laggards who may have less disposable income can adopt the product. So when we think about stages in the adoption process, which I just talked about, awareness, interest, evaluation, trial, adoption, I kind of talked about the name of the stage, what happens during that stage, and then an example of each. Feel free to read this. I think you can read it. I put most of the information on the slide, so I personally won't go over it.
We're looking at the stages in the adoption process, and there's something that I really want to point out when we talk about the last stage of the adoption process, and that is the fact that consumers can make the decision to adopt something and incorporate it into their lives, a service, an idea, any kind of market offering, or they can reject it, right? So they can say, this is not something I want, this is not something I want in my life, right? If we think about something like, I don't know, you buy yourself a bag of chips and it turns out you don't like those chips, and you say, I'll never buy those again. On the other hand, you could absolutely like something and decide, I'm going to buy that again. Or another thing that's not really mentioned here is that you can remain somewhat neutral. So for example, my last Amazon order, I placed this order for some really spicy ramen noodles because I tend to like a lot of spice. And these noodles are oh my God, they're so spicy and I love it so much. The only problem is that every time I eat them, I remember my mom saying, if you eat all of that hot stuff, you're gonna burn a hole right through your stomach. I don't think she's right, but she's like this little voice inside my head. And so I haven't decided if I'm going to adopt the noodles or reject them. So FYI, but that can happen.
When it comes to product adoption, right, actually adopting technology, some consumers go through what they call low effort when it comes to thinking about and kind of actually adopting the product. Low effort, it starts with awareness of the product. You have trial where they try the product, they form an attitude about the product, and then they adopt the product, right? And we can see this with continuous innovation, that this low effort is being made. Um, when it comes to discontinuous information, right? Like the internet, the Model T, so on and so forth. Consumers are more likely to follow a high effort product adoption process. So they go through awareness, they search for information about the product, they form an attitude about the product, they try the product, and then they adopt the product. Why is the effort different? Why do you see more effort or high effort with discontinuous products, or discontinuous innovation, I should say? Because consumers don't really know much about the innovation. They must learn about it. And through learning about it, they usually form some kind of attitude. So we see that the hierarchy changes quite a bit when it comes to high effort versus low effort for product innovation.
Talking about purchasing, you also have to think about the shopping experience, right? So for some people, the shopping experience is, you know, social experiences. It's the thrill of the chase. People who like, to find bargains. There are people who are shopping for instant status, right? Let me show on Instagram or wherever all these things that I purchased and how expensive they were. So, people who share common interests, all of these things could be motives for shopping. And so if you are a marketer and a retailer, and or an advertiser, understanding shopping motives tends to be pretty important. We should probably also acknowledge that there are people with different shopping orientations, right? You could have recreational shoppers, people who view shopping as a fun and social activity. I would argue that these are probably people who spend a lot of time at the mall, who say, "Let's go for a trip to the mall on Saturday, and we'll spend several hours there just walking around, eating at the food court, stuff like this." There are also people who are apathetic shoppers. They don't really like to shop, but they consider it an unpleasant chore. I would fall under this category if we're talking about going to the mall. I actually really don't like that. You could have ethical shoppers, you can have economic shoppers, but if you're a retailer, an advertiser, marketer, if you're somewhere along those chains, then, if you're somewhere along that chain of people, you should probably understand consumer shopping orientation. Acknowledge that there are some differences, between clicks and bricks, right? Online shopping versus going to a traditional brick and mortar place. And one of the things that has happened is that retailing has become kind of a theater type thing. Layouts have become more Instagramish. I would say focused on like being attractive and these kind of things rather than um, just kind of I guess the old school style is what I would say. I mean, you go to a J.C. Penney's and you would just go to one section and pick out your jeans. But now you go to J.C. Penney's and they have like these separate sections and it's like Martha Stewart over here and you're like, what is this? I don't know. Anyway, so malls are becoming giant entertainment centers. I think this is a good idea. They are appealing to consumer social motives and providing access to goods. I cannot stress to you how good of an idea this is because people aren't shopping as much in malls. And so you have all this space. So what do? You have to figure out a way to get people through the door. And so malls are concerned with kind of all the normal things, store image, location, so on and so forth. But they're really interested in things like becoming an entertainment center and their atmospherics, right? The scents, the sounds. I've said before that make a huge impact on consumers. We talked about an article where that's the case. Sounds as well, so you can hear the soundtrack of different stores and notice different things. I noticed, for example, in Detroit, soundtracks wherever you go tend to play a lot more urban music than you would see in a place like, let's say, downtown Kansas City. So that's kind of interesting. I would talk about that more and provide some studies, but I'll be honest, the lecture as it is so long, and I am concerned about length of lecture. Consider the purchase environment. So, in a little bit, well, in several slides from now, I'm going to talk about a study that showed that a lot of people make decisions when they're in the store at the point of purchase. So where they're literally standing, right next to the product. And so in situations like this, you could see spontaneous or unplanned buying, because of time pressures or just because, it is what it is, which is kind of a thing that I do. I buy things that aren't on my shopping list. Impulse buying, right? Sometimes you have that certain sudden urge to purchase things. Point of purchase stimuli, so POP, is increasingly popular. People or companies, I should say, retailers and marketers and advertisers are now using POP, video POP. We know that, you see stickers and signs, but you also see things like, trying the product, food where you can try it, furniture where you can try it, so on and so forth. There was several years ago a clothing company, sorry, that allowed you to build a profile of yourself. So it included everything: your weight, your proportions, your face type, your hair, all of these things, and you could try on clothing to see what you would look like. I love that. They don't really do that as much anymore. Sephora does have a platform where you can take a picture of your face and then try on different makeup. And I have actually used this for lipstick. You don't really see me with lipstick on because, why bother with the pandemic? But since I moved to Detroit, I've been wearing more lipstick because apparently that's what I was told that I should be doing. Anyway, another big influence in the purchase environment, of course, is a salesperson, right? So a person who tries to kind of influence the buying behavior of the customer through kind of resource exchange. What can I do to get you to buy it, so on and so forth. Also, sales interaction through identity negotiation, where essentially they try to identify who you are as a person and then make appeals that appeal to who you are. I will say that last year I think, I had a student who was a furniture salesman at Art Van Furniture, which I've never been in, although I do need a new couch. Um, Anyway, and he said that a lot of younger customers do not like salespeople. Now, I personally don't like salespeople because I've worked in sales and I kind of know what people do, although I didn't work in kind of B2C sales. I worked in B2B sales. But he said that younger people feel as though that they can make the decisions on their own, and they only really contact the salesperson when they have a question that they can't find using their cell phone, and that when they do find, interact with a salesperson, younger people tend to be much ruder. Now, I don't know, if that's true. That's, a sample size of one, but in my mind, it does ring true. I mean, I can see that is what I'm saying. So if we're purchasing the product, we are now reaching the point where we're consuming the product. So consumption, the process of using the product or service purchase. As a reminder, consumption can either occur immediately or be delayed. My favorite example of this is just grocery shopping, right? So every time I go to the grocery store and do, let's say a week's worth of grocery shopping, I never cook that night because honestly, grocery shopping exhausts me. Um, How consumers use a product often affects their satisfaction with a product. And then how carefully consumers use or maintain a product also determines how long it will last before another purchase is needed. Just very common sense things. I love this picture on the right here, a brief history of consumption. For the most part, we consume a product and then throw it straight in the trash. I think you see a lot of marketing initiatives to get consumers to use products more carefully, to reuse products in some cases. So, for example, instead of throwing away your vacuum cleaner, getting it repaired, or to recycle, marketing is on the back end of the consumption purchase decision as well. So, meaning that we also want to affect how you dispose of a product. And I think I mentioned that on the first day of classes. Oh, and the second day of classes as well. So Holt took this idea of consumption and this idea that consumption has meaning and basically said there are four types of consumption. The first is what he called consuming as experience, right? This is a very subjective idea and it's how we react, emotionally react, I should say, to consumption objects, right? So let's think of potato chips. Random, I know, but let's just think of potato chips. How we react to potato chips could be a part of this idea of consuming as experience. So I found this map of the US online. Apparently, the most popular potato chips in the country are Lay's potato chips. No surprise, Lay's are delicious. And I don't normally use maps or any pictures that have words in the middle of them, but I did in this case. But I'm from Missouri, and as you can see, Missouri is a Lay's place. I've lived in Kansas. Kansas is a Pringles kind of place. But think about the emotional reactions that come with potato chips. How about when we were in class last week and you mentioned a Michigan brand of potato chips, and I said, I've never heard of it. How many people were like, what? No, it's a Michigan brand. You see it all the time. You wouldn't say that you have an emotional reaction, but we often have emotional reactions to a lot of things, right? So when I was a kid, my grandparents were pretty active in my life, and my grandfather loved Werther's Originals, right? I always have an emotional reaction to Werther's Originals because they remind me of my grandfather. Um, Another type of consumption is consuming as integration. We acquire and manipulate object meanings, right? So think about this. When you go to Disneyland, right? Maybe you go to Disneyland uh, because you want some type of experience. That's fair. But maybe you go to Disneyland because you've integrated it with your sense of self. And maybe for you, Disneyland represents something different. Maybe it is this fantasy for you, or maybe it makes you feel like a prince or a princess. We often think of Disneyland as a place that you take your kids, and yet Disney does things like perform weddings, right? So if people are going to Disney when they're adults and they're getting married, Disney has to mean something deeper for those people. Um, we can look at consumption as a level of classification, right? Consumed objects in this case classify consumers. I talked about a minute ago this idea of social class and how social class lines are being blurred because a middle income consumer can send their kids to private school. But yet there are certain things that still classify consumers, right? If we were to say something like this person bought a yacht, chances are they are not middle class. They are probably quite wealthy. On the other hand, if a person bought let's say, a pair of Uggs, you could say chances are she's a young woman or younger woman. Maybe we look at something like leggings. Who purchases leggings? On the other hand, who purchases baseball hats primarily? Again, we can use consumption as a way to classify consumers. And then last but not least, we can consume as a way to play, right? So let's go back to our Disney example. I said Disney can be consumed as an experience, right? Maybe you have an emotional reaction to Disney. Maybe it's a sense of integration. Disney gives is integrated one sense of self. But Disney could also be consumed to play, right? So maybe you go to Disney because you like the rides and you love the roller coasters and you like the little huts that they have everywhere selling objects. And maybe for you, it's all three of those things. Maybe for another consumer, it's one of those things. Who knows? But in this case, Disney is a pretty good example. And you could also say, I mean, if we're being honest, we could say Disney is a classification. I never went to Disney as a little kid. I've gone as an adult. But think about it. Some people go to Disney, some people don't. Who are the types of consumers who don't go to Disney? So on and so forth. So we often talk about consumption in terms of actually using a product. But I've mentioned this before in class. Oftentimes, people buy products not for what they do, but for what they mean. I mentioned this when I talked about this idea that people don't buy products, they buy problem solutions. When you're buying a product, you're buying a problem solution. It's also important to note that although I often talk about physical or tangible products, consumption also includes intangible products. It includes experiences. It includes intangible objects. I know someone who loves going to Comic Con, right? So they're spending their money on Comic Con. That's an experience. And what they get out of that may be intangible, but is very important to them. So I actually put a picture here of someone making tiny food. I don't watch these videos often, maybe like one a month, but I love these videos. They're so unique and frankly odd. I consume tiny food production videos because they just tend to be really interesting to me as a consumer. So I love this chart. So when you think about the entire population, if you're a company, you are interested in users and frankly non-users as well. You want to know why non-users are not purchasing your product or service or intangible object, whatever, your idea, right? We can consume a lot of different things. When it comes down to users, though, we want to look at things like when is the product consumed, right? So what time of day? Where is it consumed? So what situations lead people to buy your or consume your product? How is it consumed? How much is consumed? We often break consumers down into heavy users, moderate users, or light users. For example, I'm a very light user when it comes to watching television. But probably a more heavy user when it comes to watching something like Netflix, because I have Netflix and I'll just watch the same couple of shows over and over again.